Merry Christmas. I hope you're all enjoying the holidays so far. Today's video doesn't need much of an introduction. As the title would suggest, it is an hour of Christmas-themed stories. The writers' links are in the description if you wish to check them out. Huge thank you to all of them for making this video possible by allowing me to share them with you. Please be sure to drop a like and comment if you enjoy, as it helps the channel out in a very real way. Remember, you can send in your own stories to rylhstories@gmail.com if you'd like to have one featured in a video. Enjoy the stories, and have a very Merry Christmas. Natalie wasn't my friend, not even close. Was she my bully? I don't know. Would you consider the person that stole your dolls and broke them your bully? How about the person that spread every nasty rumor about you, even if they knew it wasn't true? If you answered yes to one or both of those questions, then yeah, she most definitely was. We lived right next door to each other. We could even see each other's bedrooms through our windows in each of our rooms. I mostly tried to keep the curtains closed so I wouldn't have to deal with her more than I already had to. There were a few moments where I felt some sympathy for her, like how her parents never came to chorus concerts or never showed up to any of her extravagant birthday parties, and even missed her middle school graduation. But she would always lash out at others soon afterward. I guess that was her coping mechanism, in a sick way. I might have been one of her primary targets, but she was an apex predator. When you're rich, pretty, and act like you're at the top of a food chain, people will treat you as such. Anyone could be her prey. Still, she usually went after the most vulnerable. Monica, for example. Monica moved from Austria in 9th grade. She never shook her strong accent, and was probably never a social butterfly to begin with. It was extremely easy for Natalie to pick on her, and no one would stick up for her. Doing so would only make you her next target. That's why I didn't help Monica when I saw Natalie mocking her. I was walking home on the last day before Christmas break when I saw Natalie berating Monica for something or another. It didn't really matter with Natalie. She would find whatever could hurt you the most and used it to its fullest potential. Monica was starting to cry. I knew I should have helped her, but I wasn't brave enough to face Natalie's wrath. "You better stop it," Monica yelled. Or what? Natalie had her there. Well, Natalie's parents were far from Mother or Father of the Year. They did get her everything she wanted, from her sparkling diamond earrings to the principal ignoring her bad behavior in return for generous donations. If it could be bought, they got it for her. Monica's brows knitted together as she tried to think. The Krampus. The Christmas? Natalie's demeanor changed from haughty to confused in a second. Krampus. It's a demon that eats bad kids on Christmas. You could tell Monica realized how ridiculous it sounded the more she explained it. Natalie began to laugh. Oh my god, are you serious? I'm so sorry. Please tell Devil Santa Claus not to eat me, she said sarcastically. It's true. My grandma told me he ate a kid in her hometown. Monica was still clinging to the naive hope she would win this fight. You're so pathetic, it's almost sad. Natalie's voice was bright despite her cruel words. Hey, I have an idea. Why don't you go back to Austria and be the Krampus's Christmas dinner? You could prove the Krampus is real and rid the world of a waste of space. Monica's face was red and tears were streaming down it. Natalie walked away, apparently proud she had reduced a girl to tears for no real reason. Monica just stared into nothing before sobbing. I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly walked over to her. "Are you okay?" I asked, even though the answer was obvious. Monica hugged me instead of answering. I was a bit put off at first, but she was like a little kid, desperate for comfort. I began to soothe her as best I could. I wish Natalie would just disappear. She choked out between sobs. As terrible as it sounds, I thought the same thing. Natalie made people afraid of her, and then harvested that fear to make herself more powerful. I know that sounds far too dramatic for high school drama, but when you're crushed again and again, that doesn't register. I just wanted Natalie to leave me alone forever. I finally got my wish on Christmas Eve. I had gotten home from a family Christmas party. It was late and I just wanted to flop on my bed, fall asleep, and awake to gifts under our tree. But Natalie couldn't even let me have that, I guess. The light from Natalie's room was pouring into mine. I went up to my window and looked into her room. Natalie was laying on her bed and seemed to be texting on her phone. She looked up from it and saw me. I pointed to her lamp and then to my bed. I don't know if she understood what I was trying to signal, but she just flipped me off before returning to her phone. "Merry Christmas to you too," I muttered. I decided to shut my curtains, hoping they would block out the light. Before I closed them, I noticed something strange. Frost was creeping up Natalie's window. It was 60 degrees out, so frost was nearly impossible. And even if it was the right temperature, the frost was forming extremely fast. I stared at it in confusion. Natalie looked up from her phone. I don't think she noticed the frost at first, but I could see the confusion on her face soon enough. She went up to the window to examine it, I presume. She also started shivering. The frost was still climbing up her window at an alarming rate. Natalie tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I found it funny, to be honest. The almighty Queen Bee, losing a fight against a window. Then I noticed it. It looked like a shadow was slowly forming behind Natalie. It rose higher than her head, while she remained utterly oblivious. I could barely make out Natalie's figure, while the shadow was even harder to see. I didn't realize the shadow was getting closer to Natalie, until a shape covered Natalie's throat. Natalie's hand shot up and grabbed onto the shape. While I couldn't see her face anymore, I could clearly tell that she was struggling against the grip. It was of no use, though. The shadow figure lifted her off the ground and away from the window. Natalie's legs kicked wildly as the figure lifted her even higher. I could now see the shadow's body. It appeared to have a large, human-shaped body from the neck down, but its head was weird. It was way too long. When the shadow turned, it almost looked like a Santa hat, since it seemed to slump at the end. It brought up what looked to be a bag. It roughly shoved Natalie inside the sack. It then closed it. I was too shocked to move for a second. I could only watch as the shadow threw the sack over its shoulder and turned its back toward the window. For a second, I thought it would leave or disappear. Then it turned its head back to the window and stared right at me. I yelped and closed the curtains as fast as I could. What the hell was that? I thought. Did I see Natalie get kidnapped? Was I dreaming? Did I hallucinate that? Before I could come up with an explanation, I felt intensely cold. I began to shiver. My breath looked like smoke in the air. I was baffled at first. Then I remembered how Natalie seemed to be before. Whatever that shadow thing was, appeared. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I opened the curtains a bit. My heart stopped. The shadow figure wasn't in Natalie's room, and frost was quickly covering my window. I ran from my window to the door. No matter how hard I pulled, the door wouldn't open. I looked back and saw shadows slowly building up in the middle of the room. I began pushing against the door like a trapped animal. "Are you frightened, child?" I froze instantly. The voice was deep, cold, and old-sounding. The words didn't sound like English, but I somehow understood them. I frantically tried in vain to open the door. I didn't want to look, but my head seemed to move without my consent. The first thing I noticed about the creature was how tall he was. His head almost touched the ceiling. To my horror, I realized the creature's strange head shape came from the fact he had horns. They were long and bent back at the ends. His face was the shape of a human's, but with a goat's nose and yellow, cat-like eyes. I could see fangs peeking out from behind his leathery lips. The creature took a step, with a loud clack. I looked at his leg and saw they were covered in thick fur. His feet were hooves. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The creature wagged his finger at me. Good children do not scream, and do not cry, but you're not a good child, are you? What? I was surprised I could speak, considering my voice was gone before. Who are you? The creature's lips peeled back to reveal rows of sharp teeth. I am the Krampus, the punisher of ungrateful and cruel children. I'm not bad. The words rushed out of my mouth. I still barely understood what was happening, but there was a deep, primal fear building within me. Krampus chuckled loudly. Oh, really? So you have protected others, even if you had to put yourself at risk. You never wished ill of other humans, even if they had done you harm? My blood ran cold. How did you... I see your waking hours. I see your dreams. I see your thoughts. I see you everywhere, and you can never hide from me, no matter how hard you try. Please don't hurt me. I begged. I sunk to my knees. I'll be better, I promise. That's what they all say. Few ever keep their promises. Besides, that's not what I want from you. It's not? The Krampus gave me a morbid parody of a grandfatherly smile. Fear is such a powerful thing. The fear made you hate that girl, but also caused you to let her do as she wished. You let her torment poor Monica, and Monica, in her own fear, told cruel Natalie about me. And just a tiny bit of Natalie feared me, and that is what let me come. He took a lock of my hair and pulled on it. I winced from the pain. Fear of consequences is what keeps people good. When they ignore normal consequences, I become the consequences. And you will tell people of me. Sure. I was about to have a full-blown panic attack. I would have said anything to get the creature to leave me alone. The Krampus tisked. I wish I could believe you, but I think you'll need a reminder to keep your promise. So I will give you a gift. The Krampus reached into his large bag. There were shapes that poked through like they were trying to get out. As he opened it, hands reached out. I realized what those shapes were. The legs and arms of children trapped within. The Krampus pulled out Natalie. He was holding her by her face, his huge hand covering her mouth. Natalie desperately tried to get out of his grip, but Krampus was just too strong. Her eyes darted wildly around the room until they landed on me. We locked eyes. For the first and only time, we were able to truly empathize with each other. The Krampus used his free hand to grab onto one of Natalie's diamond earrings. Natalie, realizing what was about to happen, began to struggle even harder. I could only shut my eyes as hard as I could. I didn't hear Natalie scream or cry, but did hear a sickening and wet rip, quickly followed by another. I think I blacked out for a second because I can't recall much of what happened after that, until I heard the Krampus say, "Open your eyes." Too scared to defy him, I did as I was told. Natalie was gone. Krampus had the sack almost casually slung around his shoulder. For a blissful moment, I thought my fear-addled mind had simply imagined seeing Natalie. Then I looked down. A pair of sparkly diamond earrings laid at my feet. Blood was splattered at the ends, and a small piece of flesh was attached to each of them. I felt bile quickly move up my throat. I had to cover my mouth with my hand to prevent myself from vomiting. I swallowed the bile, my mouth tasting of bile acid. The corners of Krampus's mouth quirked upwards, whether it was from seeing me get his message, or just sick enjoyment from my terror. I don't know. Do you understand now? I nodded my head again and again. Yeah, I'll tell everyone. Tears of fear ran down my face. Just please leave me alone. The Krampus nodded his head calmly. Remember this last thing. Be good even when you think no one else is watching, because I am. He gave me a large, ravenous grin, and my Christmas feast could always be bigger. With that, he disappeared into the shadows. I'm sorry for telling you this. I wanted to pretend this never happened, but Natalie disappeared that Christmas. Billy, Amanda, Linda, all were known as naughty children, and they got whisked away on Christmas. Only I know by who. Still, I wasn't going to post this. Through some investigating, I learned they all knew about the rumors of Krampus. I realized why the creature wanted to spread his legend. Last week, Natalie's earrings showed up in my room. Even though I threw them out the Christmas Natalie became his victim, there was still dried blood on them. He's still watching me, and now he's watching you. Please forgive me, and pray you've been good, because the Krampus is coming soon, and he's ready for his Christmas feast. Let me just get this out of the way now. I'm a grown-ass man who has no friends or family within a 200-mile radius. No, it's not because of work or school. It's simply a conscious choice. I just don't like people. I'm sure my bitch of a wife and judgmental father can be blamed for that. I have anger issues myself, but at least I acknowledge my flaws. Call me a Scrooge, Grinch, or Grouch. I don't give a damn. But what you can't call me is crazy. I know what's been happening is real, and I feel utterly powerless to stop it. It started a week ago. I trudged like a zombie to my kitchen to start my day with a fresh cup of joe. As I yawned, taking my first sip, I noticed something in the living room. I jumped and cursed as I spilled hot coffee down my front. I threw my mug into the sink in frustration, ignoring the resounding crash as I bent low in self-defense. Fists raised feebly. That's when I realized that there wasn't a person in my house. It was a Christmas tree. Or something that was supposed to look like a Christmas tree. The tree was half dead, the smell of rotting pines assaulting my nostrils. I nearly gagged, wondering how I hadn't noticed it before. I could see termites scurrying all over the damn thing. Malcolm. It had to have been Malcolm, my landlord. No one else had a key to my apartment, and I wouldn't put it past him to play a prank on me like this. Still, this was not funny. I planned to call him and give him a piece of my mind. First, though, I had to get rid of the tree. I spent nearly half an hour hauling the big-ass thing out of my apartment and down to the side of the road, cursing and covered in termites. I called Malcolm and left him a wordy voicemail. Then I went to work and forgot about the little prank. Until the next day. The tree was back in my apartment, but now it had been adorned in rusty, busted out Christmas lights. The odor was not nearly as sour as my attitude as I called Malcolm again. I demanded he come to my apartment. When he got there, he acted as though he had no clue how the tree had gotten into my home. He asked if I had any friends or family that had come into town. Upset that he was playing dumb, I threatened to talk to his superiors if this were to happen again. Malcolm once again assured me that this was not his doing, but he would change my locks and help me get the tree out of my dwelling. I could smell the tree as soon as I woke up the next morning. Furious, I threw my bedroom door open and stormed into the living room. The tree was back, busted lights, pentagram-shaped star and all. But now there was something under the tree as well. A box wrapped in blue wrapping paper. I had had enough. I called the cops. The cops took the gift, considering it was a suspicious package, and left an officer to watch over my apartment for the night. I got a call from work later that day from one of the officers down at the station. The gift box had contained a human finger. They were gonna need me for questioning. This had gone from annoying to immediately concerning rather quickly. After spending hours at the police station, the officers advised me to find a hotel to stay in. I did, And guess what I woke up to see the next day? The same Christmas tree. There was another box underneath, this one decked in purple wrapping. I thought that I was losing my mind. In an anxiety-induced craze, I ripped open the gift rather than calling the cops again. There was a whole hand this time, though it was missing the ring finger. I didn't call the cops this time. I set the tree and the box ablaze after hauling them into a secluded area. I sped back home and began grabbing my most important possessions. I told Malcolm that I was breaking my lease, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. Then I set off on the road, driving for hours and hours, before finally pulling over to at least get a nap. When I awoke, I found a new box beside me. Though I didn't want to open it, I could hear a woman's voice in my ear, urging me to do so. I tore the box open and nearly vomited. A whole arm had been crammed inside. I have been getting a new body part every day. I am confessing to you that I recognize them very well. I don't know if the police are after me, but I'd rather be caught by them if we're being honest. I don't think it will save me. I murdered my wife last Christmas, but I suppose she wants some company this year. What do you guys do on the day of Christmas? I bet it's much better than what happens to me every year on this sacred holiday. What is it like? To drink hot chocolate while munching happily on butter-churned cookies. To stare intently at the warm fireplace providing you with a sense of reassurance through the bitter cold winter. There might even be a joyful Christmas tune, masking itself in the dense background. So is Christmas your favorite holiday? It definitely isn't mine. It's not that I'm missing anything or living under poor conditions. My parents never failed to decorate our lawn with a variety of sparkling ornaments. Despite the loads of work we must complete, our Christmas tree still stands tall in the living room in every passing year. Yet I still hate it, and I despise it because of something I've never told my parents, nor anyone close to me in my life. A secret I have been latching onto for years, and I'm still debating whether or not to share it now. Despite the worry, if this doesn't go out fast enough, sooner or later I'll be dead with the rest of the lot. A while ago, maybe 10 years prior to the moment I addressed this concern, my sister was abducted on Christmas Eve. It had been a joyful day for me, as well as my family who spent long hours trying to make this holiday an exceptional experience. Our dinner consisted of boiled bean sprouts with all the festivities a household needed. Later that night, my younger siblings and I played a few board games with each other, doing your usual brother-sister activities. Although this happened ages ago, it still puts a smile on my lonesome face. That is, until I remember the events that occurred hours after this cheerful celebration. I was laying in my bed, contemplating various ideas regarding my family's next Christmas. All of it was a blur, but for a moment I heard something plop down the chimney. As a child, I really believed in Santa Claus. Thinking he'd come to deliver presents to my door, I hopped out of my mattress and tiptoed to the edge of my door to take a quick peek. A large figure of a man blocked my vision, his boots making soft crunching noises on the carpet. I was so elated that I didn't notice the door of my sibling's room wide open. On that night, my youngest sister was taken away, and since then, she's never come back. After that incident, my parents called private investigators to locate her, worried to death about her whereabouts. It's been so long since that tragic loss hit my family, and we've seemed to have forgotten it, but every Christmas since then has been solemn. It hurts my heart every year when I look at their sorrowful faces and realize that I witnessed what happened that night, but I never tell them. The young ones sleep in the master bedroom now, my parents protecting them from harm. I guess that's better off for them, knowing that the man still lurks. Every night I hear a plop from the chimney, and every year I wish Christmas never existed. He always taunts me, his long white beard brushing across my chin. I know you're awake. During the Christmas season, everyone is happy and cheerful. Everyone but me. I don't think I could ever be happy during this time of the year again, ever since what happened a few years ago. Anyway, I think the year was 2015. It was Christmas Eve. My parents and I were getting ready for the Christmas party the next day. I was making sure the house was nice enough for the party when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned and saw a man outside my house. He was looking at me through a window. Before I had time to get a good look at him, he ran away. I went outside to find him, but I found no traces. Since there was no snow outside, he left no footprints. I thought that it may have been one of our neighbors, so I let him get away. I decided that if I saw him again, I'd call the cops. Everything seemed normal until the next day, Christmas. My aunts, uncles, and cousins came. It just so happened that it was snowing outside, so my cousin, Raymond, who had never seen snow before since he lives on the other side of the country, went outside to play in it. He was out there for a few minutes when we wanted him to come back inside. I looked everywhere in the yard to find him. Since there was snow, I was able to find footprints leading into a forest near our house. What alarmed me was that there were 2 sets of footprints. There was no one outside with him, so I began to wonder who on earth it was. I then noticed that the footprints were arranged. It appeared that either he was being chased or he was chasing someone. I knew that he could be in danger, so I went into the forest to find him. I was walking in the forest for what was probably 10 minutes when I saw something red behind some bushes. I got closer and saw what it was. It was a man with a red coat carrying a big sack. It looked an awful lot like Santa, but I knew it wasn't him. I had to ask him if he's seen Raymond, so I shouted out to him, "Hey you!" He turns towards me. It wasn't Santa. It was a beardless man who appeared to be in his 30s or 40s. "What?" he shouts in a not very nice tone. "I'm looking for a teenage boy. He has black hair, blue jeans, and a olive green jacket." Even though this man and I were 50 feet away, I could see his brows raising when I said that. He says, "Oh, in that case, I'm looking for you." I got a little frightened by that statement, but I didn't run. I just stood there. The man got closer. I could see more details of him, more horrifying details. He had a huge scar on his face, a machete, and a huge boot knife. The scariest thing was that his coat wasn't red. It was originally a lighter color, but it appeared that it was stained by a crimson red substance. He drops the sack in front of me. He looks at me with his unnaturally gray eyes. "The name's Kris Kringle. Merry Christmas." After that was said, he runs away into the forest. I'd never seen a human run that fast. I looked back down at the sack. I noticed that there appeared to be blood coming from the bottom of it. I was a little hesitant to open it, but I did anyway. I was disgusted and horrified to see what was inside. It was Raymond's dismembered body. His head and foot were towards the top of the sack. Something was carved into them. On his head, "I see you when you're sleeping. I know when you're awake. And you better watch out, or you'll look like this someday," was carved onto his foot. I ran home as fast as I could. I told my family what happened and called the police. For my family's sake, I never showed them Raymond's body. Still, my Uncle Jack and Aunt Amanda, Raymond's parents, were devastated. The police couldn't find the man, and they still can't. I really hope they find him soon, because I've been starting to catch glimpses of the man out of the corner of my eye whenever I'm outside. I'm afraid I'm on his list. If you have seen this man before, or if you have any idea who he could be, let me know. I've seen her again, the girl in the snowstorm. I didn't know that I was in danger the first time I saw her. On the contrary, it was an experience that I kept thinking about all winter. It was over a decade ago. and I was visiting a friend that morning to drop off a Christmas present for him. It was a few miles from home, but I enjoyed the walk, despite it being an even colder winter than usual. My mother had warned me to return home soon, as the local news were predicting a blizzard that evening. So I kept my visit brief, and started home that afternoon. By the time I'd made it halfway, the wind was brutally cold, and the snow was falling so heavily that I could barely see where I was. It was too late to turn back and bunker down at my friend's place, so I had to keep walking home. I wore glasses back then, switched to contacts a few years back, and had to take them off. It was bad enough to see everything as white blurs, but it was impossible to see anything through wet, snow-covered lenses. Walking through a blizzard without being able to see is a helpless feeling. You can only hope that you're heading the right way, fighting the wind not just to stay upright, but to make sure that you don't lose your sense of direction. You can't see the nearby buildings very well, and you're constantly on the lookout for familiar sights that can tell you where you're at. I followed the sidewalk as best I could, occasionally stepping off the curb or onto someone's lawn. It was in this blurry haze of wind and snow that I first saw the girl. The first thing I noticed was the red scarf, blowing madly in the wind. She was walking in the opposite direction, and at first, it looked like she was on the other side of the streets. The closer she got, the more I questioned what direction I was looking in. Was she crossing the streets, or was I not walking on the sidewalk anymore? I could barely tell where I was. I took a moment to make sure I was still on the sidewalk, and by the time I confirmed where I was, the girl was only a few yards away. I could see her more clearly. She was wearing a mismatched assortment of winter clothes, and a lot of layers, even 2 hats. Her puffy blue jacket was oversized and unzipped, and underneath I could see that she was wearing another heavy coat. She didn't look intimidating at all. On the contrary, she looked vulnerable. She was short and notably thin, almost unhealthily so. I was almost 10 at the time, so I imagined that she couldn't have been older than that. The way she was bundled up in so many layers of clothes made her look uncomfortable, and gave her an uneven, lumpy shape. I assumed at the time that she was poor, maybe even homeless. Instead of walking past each other, we simply stopped in front of one another. Something compelled me to stare down at her, and she looked up at me with a sort of vague expectation. Her hats and scarf covered most of her face, leaving only her eyes and part of her cheeks visible. Her eyes were big and dark, like black holes against her pale skin and the surrounding snow. I lost myself in her stare, like I was falling into her eyes. It was like I was in some sort of trance, pulled to her without realizing it. She took her earmuffs off, but didn't speak. "Hi," I said weakly, not knowing what to say. She looked me up and down, and something about that made me shiver, even in the cold. It was like she was taking stock of me, of what I had to offer. Before I could ask what she wanted, the girl held her hands up. They were pale, shaking, bare. The girl didn't have any gloves. Something about the way she looked at me so impatiently made me look down at my own gloved hands. I didn't have a particularly good set of gloves, but they were the only pair I had. I looked at her again, and something about her big, dark eyes made me want to give them to her. I took my gloves off and held them out for her to take. I almost regretted it, but then her freezing hand touched my bare skin as she took them, and they were so cold that I knew I was doing the right thing. She put the gloves on, looked up, and smiled. The scarf was still covering most of her face, but I could see it in how her cheeks raised up, and in the sparkle of her eyes. As she started to walk past me, I realized that the blizzard was easing up. I put my glasses on, turned around, and looked at the girl. She had stopped walking, and was staring down at the gloves, admiring them. "Merry Christmas," I mumbled to myself, and she looked back at me, almost as if she could hear me over the wind. I waved, realized my hands were cold, and shoved them into my jacket pockets. She nodded and turned around, continuing her walk to wherever she was going, but not in any sort of hurry. I was only a block away from my house, so my hands weren't cold for very long. When I walked inside, my mother immediately noticed that they were missing. For some reason, I didn't tell her the truth, despite how chivalrous it would have made me sound. I lied, suggesting that I must have forgotten them at my friend's house, and went up to my room. Something about the girl made me want to keep our interaction private, like it was something special. I sat down on my bed and mulled over what I'd just experienced. I didn't have a crush on the girl, but something about the way she stared at me was so compelling, like I was defenseless against it. I wanted to see her again. I looked out from my bedroom window, somehow expecting to see the girl, and she was there, on the other side of the streets. It was like she'd been waiting for me. I opened my window, blasted by cold air, and waved at her. She waved back, then started walking away. I watched her walk out of view, wondering who she was, where she had come from, and if she was ever there at all. Something about her felt unreal, like I'd vividly imagined her. I'd hoped to see her again that winter, but never did. Whenever I went outside, shoving my hands into my pockets, I wondered if she still had the gloves. Whenever I got home, I checked my window to see if she was standing on the other side of the street again, waiting for me. I daydreamed about running into her during one of my walks, which just so happened to become much more frequent, but I never saw her. Not as a child, anyway. That year was memorably cold. Blizzards moved in and out. Roads were all slick with ice, and inches of snow fell every day. We always had some snow, but that year was bad. The winters have been pretty heavy so far, but not on that level. We've had a lot of snow and ice, but no blizzards, yet. It's the perfect kind of winter for long walks in the snow. Last week I was enjoying the season and going on a long walk. It was snowing lightly, and the sky was a solid white of clouds. It was a very peaceful walk at first, but then I saw something in the distance, on the other side of the street. It was a girl, short and bundled up in layers of winter clothing. Most of the clothes were different, but the red scarf brought me back to that meeting a decade before. It was her. I'd been obsessed with this girl as a child, reminded of her every winter for years. It was like opening a time capsule of memories, buried in the back of my mind since I was in middle school. But at the same time, it was more than memories. She was standing right across the street, in mostly different clothes. But the girl was the same size, the same height, like she hadn't aged a day. I was lost in that impossible thought, wondering if she was just really short and petite, when I realized that she was crossing the street and heading in my direction. Does she recognize me? I wondered. I couldn't move, and I didn't want to. Something was so disarming about the surreal sight of this girl from 10 years ago. I remembered wondering, as a child, if I'd imagined her. Hadn't she followed me home and waved at me from across the street? Did I just make that up and forget that it wasn't true? She stopped right in front of me and looked up. I remembered how I looked down at her large eyes, so dark that they looked black against the white of her face and the snow. And here we were again. I was an adult, and sure enough, she was still a child. Her scarf still covered up her lower face, but I could see from the upper half that she looked exactly the same, like she walked through time to see me again. However, the clothes had aged. Her scarf was worn and stained, her jacket ripped in some places. She had a different pair of gloves that looked fairly new, and I wondered if some young boy gave them to her. Did he also think that he imagined her? She looked me up and down, and I remembered that she did the same thing last time, taking stock. I assumed in the moment that she was looking for something to ask me for, another article of clothing to keep her warm, and I was right. She settled on my scarf, and she lightly tugged on it, as if demanding it. I pulled off my scarf, ignoring how cold it made my neck, and handed it over. There was something so strange about the experience that I just felt like I had to go with it, if only to see where it was going. Like before, I was compelled by something in her stare to do what she wanted. I was transfixed by this impossible girl. Then she removed her red scarf, and I almost let myself scream. The skin of her mouth and chin were stained red, and large fangs jutted down from amongst her upper teeth. She looked up as she dropped her old scarf on the ground, and started putting mine around her neck, giggling at the sight of my fear. I was grateful when she covered her mouth with my scarf, but still terrified. I was glued to the spot, but desperately wanted to run. She'd had a sort of disarming aura about her, but it was gone, replaced by danger. I felt compelled to get away from this bloody-mouthed child, but frozen in place at the same time. She laughed again, the light and innocent joy of youth. And then she spoke. "I remember you. Did you move?" I nodded silently, otherwise unable to move. I couldn't stop staring at her eyes. At first, I'd assumed that they were brown and simply looked darker in contrast to the light, but now I could see the endless pits of blackness in her eyes. I could feel a sort of force moving from her eyes to me, compelling me to stay put and do what she wanted. She had me under her spell, and she knew it. It was funny to her. "Oh, I think I remember where you live then," she said before giggling again. "Thanks for the scarf, and the gloves. Stay warm." She walked past me. I heard her footsteps in the snow get farther away, but couldn't will myself to turn around. I didn't want to see her right behind me, admiring her scarf as she'd admitted the gloves I gave her a decade ago. Would I have waved at her too, if she was there? I imagined that I would have, if I had the feeling that it was what she wanted. When I got home, I locked the doors and windows, willing myself not to look out and see if she was waiting for me again, like she had been the first time. I haven't left the house since. I've tried to convince myself that she was imaginary, but I'd rather be terrified than let myself believe that I'm crazy. My mom asked me if I was okay yesterday. I brushed it off and asked her about the heavy winter a decade before. She recalled that it was particularly bad, even worse than they thought at the time. When I asked what she meant, she told me that the local news kept running stories that following spring about a few missing people who'd been found after the snow all melted away, dead on the side of the road, as if they'd just keeled over and been covered by the snow without anyone noticing. My mom remembered that one of the missing was from this side of town. I've since looked into it, and this side of town is really only a mile or so away from our home. The article I found mentioned that the person who discovered that body mentioned that there was dried blood on their coat and neck, like they'd cut themselves falling and bled to death right by the sidewalk. I have my own theories. You may be wondering why I'm staying indoors when the girl from the Snowstorm knows where I live. The thing is, I'm not sure she can enter my home without an invitation. Either way, I'm not going to risk going outside again. Not that I have the courage to in the first place. I can barely will myself to look out the window at this point. I don't know what to do besides share my experience with all of you, in the hopes that you're also careful this winter, even if you're not a local. There's no telling how many of these things are out there, and if you have to go outside, bundle up. Stay warm. About a 10-minute drive from my parents' house was a Christmas tree farm, owned and operated by a very nice couple called the Jacksons. As you can probably guess, college was very expensive for me and my family. so I worked almost full-time during the long breaks from school when I was at home. We'd been buying trees from the Jacksons for about 15 years, so they were more than happy to hire me for the month. Their whole operation covered about 6 square acres. I know that sounds like a ton, but they really were the only place you could cut your own tree in town. Sure, you could always buy pre-cut ones outside the grocery store, but you'd be missing out on the charm and feeling of satisfaction of cutting down your own, wouldn't you? The Jacksons themselves didn't have heavy jobs. They more than paid their due by growing and taking care of the trees all year. Dan would sit outside the door to his shed with a thermos of hot coffee, handling transactions as the buyers stopped to exchange cash. There was only one road on the entire property. It started at the entrance gate, wound around the house, and left by the exit gate. Unless you wanted to drive through a few acres of trees, there was no way you were getting out without paying. Dan kept a notepad in his pocket to catch the license plates of the runners. Wendy spent the mornings making Christmas cookies in the kitchen of the house before joining Dan outside in his vigil by the shed, giving each customer a Santa or Rudolph or tree-shaped treat, sometimes still warm from the oven. The 2 other seasonal hires and I did the other work. I helped the customers load the trees into their vehicle if they had trouble. Dolan and Liam, 2 friends who'd been working for the Jacksons as long as I had, cut down trees for people who either forgot their saw or didn't bring one. It was, all in all, a very easy-going, comfortable job. I didn't even mind that I was working full-time during the holidays. The day of December 19th started out like any other. I pulled into the lot in my dad's car at 9:30. Business wouldn't start for another half hour or so, but I liked to talk with Dan and Wendy beforehand. The sky was cloudy and gray, threatening to send some sort of precipitation down on us. I personally hoped it was snow, but then again, I was always close to the house and could run in for a bit whenever I got cold. I let myself in by the front door and walked into the kitchen. Wendy was just taking a bunch of cookies out of the oven. Dan was sitting at the counter, finishing off his breakfast. Last Christmas was blaring on the radio near the window. "Oh, good morning, Blake. I didn't hear you come in," Wendy said. "Sky looks pretty overcast today," I said as I leaned against the island. Dan nodded. "Weather report said it's going to start snowing in the afternoon. We might have 3 or 4 inches by tomorrow morning." We talked for a little while longer before we heard tires pull up outside. "That must be Dolan and Liam," Wendy said. "Blake, would you go out there and tell them to put on their warmest coats? I'd hate for them to catch a cold." Nodding, I went outside and caught them just as they were leaving the car. "What's up, man?" Dolan asked as he took out his saw from the back seat. "Weather report said it's going to snow today. Wendy wants you guys to put on heavier jackets or something," I said. Liam came around the side and snorted. "Oh please, around here, they always say it's going to snow every year, and what do we get? Maybe flurries if we're lucky. I wouldn't worry about it." Dolan slid on his jacket. "I don't know, man. Better safe than sorry." We heard the front door open and close as Dan stepped out, sliding on a pair of gloves. 4 more days of work, boys. Let's make this a good one." The time passed slowly, but I didn't mind. We got our first customers at 10:15, and by 11:30 the cars were really rolling in. I suppose if I thought about it, December 19th was a little late to be getting your tree, but who was I to judge? The 3 of us got free trees for our families, as well as the weekly paycheck. I took my lunch break around 2. I was sitting on the porch eating my turkey sandwich when the first snowflakes began falling. Wendy came out with her lunch and sat down beside me. "Looks like it's going to be a white Christmas after all." I nodded. "Yeah, I can't remember the last time we've had one like this." "Hey, don't jump to conclusions. This stuff could melt away by tomorrow morning." So what? I'm an optimist. It turned out I was a little too much of an optimist. By 4 the ground had 3 inches of snow on it, and the drifts were only getting higher. Each time I saw Dolan and Liam head back out with another customer, it looked like they had another layer on. Dan had retreated inside the shed, and only came out when a customer came by. I didn't see Wendy out all day. Feeling the chill, I didn't blame her. The light was already rapidly disappearing by 4:30. At 4:45, I saw 3 shapes come out of the almost darkness and join me on the porch. Dolan and Liam shivered beside me, while Dan whistled as he thumbled through the day's gains. Good job, boys. We sold 57 trees. Charged that for $30 each, and we got ourselves about $1,700. I'd say we're doing pretty well, don't you think? Liam nodded. Yeah, sure. Can we head out now? I want to get home before they decide to hold the Iditarod here. Oh, sure, you just... But Dan's sentence was cut off by headlights suddenly cutting through the snowy darkness. They shut off as we heard the car door slam. 2 figures came running towards the porch. Oh hell, what now? Liam groaned. Dolan punched him and told him to be quiet as they arrived. They took off their hoods and scarves, revealing a young couple. The woman stepped forward and began to speak, sounding very out of breath. Did we make it? You guys aren't closed, are you? Dan looked taken aback for a moment before responding. Why do you ask? The woman sighed and put her hands on her hips. We're visiting my parents tomorrow morning, and we won't be back until late Christmas Eve. This is the only day we can still get a tree. Can we buy one from you still? Dan looked a little taken aback before nodding. Hold on, let me go ask my wife. He disappeared inside the house, the door slamming shut behind him. The man smiled apologetically at us. We're really sorry about this. I know it's probably the end of your guys' shift, and you all want to go home, but we... The woman cut him short. Babe, it's okay. I think this place doesn't close till 5. The car clock said it was 4:47. She looked at us and smiled with the same regret as her husband. Sorry about this, though. I know it's short notice. I stood up, putting my hand out. No trouble at all. I hope you guys can find a good tree in this weather. I think most of the good ones have been taken. The man sighed. Well, we'll just have to manage. The door opened again and Dan stepped out. Good news, you folks are gonna be our last customers of the day. We have over 6 acres of trees to choose from. I'm sure you'll find something you like. After all, we have the best Christmas trees in town. Dolan piped up from the bench. But please hurry up, we're freezing out here. The man laughed. Don't worry, we won't be long. Did you folks bring a saw? This place is cut your own, you know. No, we didn't. Don't worry, I'm sure one of these fine young men will be more than happy to accompany you on your search. Dolan and Liam both appear to be having a contest to see who could evade Dan's gaze more. Liam, get over here. Help these folks find the perfect tree. Liam groaned and stood up, taking his saw with him as he walked over. Sure, anything for you, Dan. The woman laughed as the 3 of them stepped off the porch and into the falling snow. We won't be long, 15-20 minutes at the most. Thank you. And with that, they were gone, swallowed up by the darkness between the trees. Could you boys wait here as well? They may want help loading that tree into their car, Dan asked. I nodded, but Dolan only groaned. I guess, I gotta. I'm sharing a ride with Liam anyway. The 3 of us headed into the house. We joined Wendy around the kitchen table and waited. Dolan and I browsed on our phones as the Jacksons drank coffee. Mariah Carey blasted All I Want for Christmas Is You in the background, but no one seemed to be in the seasonal mood at the moment. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. By the time 5:30 rolled around, it was pitch black outside. Wendy got up and went out onto the porch. I followed and we stood there, looking out at the swirling snow. That couple and Liam should have been back by now, don't you think? She asked, turning to me with a look of concern. They said they'd be 15 minutes at most. It's been nearly 45. Maybe they're just taking a long time. After all, you guys have so many trees to choose from. Wendy opened the door and called inside. A moment later, Dan came out, followed by Dolan. They have been out there a while, haven't they? He rubbed his chin. Let's give them a few more minutes. We walked back inside. Wendy turned to us with a pleading expression. "Can you boys go out and see if they're alright? I know it's long after closing, but I'm worried. I think something happened." We both nodded. She went inside and reappeared a few moments later with 2 flashlights. "Just go look around for 10 or 20 minutes. If you can't find them by then, we'll call the police." We crossed the road and stepped into the trees. The snow swirled all around us, dancing in the beams of our flashlights. Though we were bundled up and had boots, the cold still permeated and chilled our bones. The drifts seemed impassable, even though they were only 1 or 2 feet tall at the most. Dolan's voice piped up over the wind as it whistled thinly among the branches. "Those people picked a terrible time to get a tree." Then, as if in afterthoughts, he added, "I hope they're okay. Liam too." I nodded my agreement, but I don't think he noticed. We had been searching for about 5 minutes before I realized that we didn't know the couple's names. I expressed this concern with Dolan, who just said, "Well, Liam's with them. We can just call his name and we'll find them too." A few more minutes passed and we weren't any closer than when we started. We got no response, no matter how loud we yelled. This is going nowhere. If we have any hope of finding them at all, we should split up. Dolan nodded. "Okay, I'll head off in this direction." He pointed his flashlight down a long row. "And you can go that way." He pointed in the opposite direction. I couldn't think of a better plan, so I agreed. "We'll look for 15 minutes. If we can't find them, I'll call you and we'll head back to the house together." And with that, I was alone among the trees. For the next 10 minutes, I wandered through the snow, calling Liam's name and swatting branches out of my face. The trees were only about 6 or 7 feet tall, but they seemed to tower over me in the darkness. I still bumped into one occasionally and let out a yelp of surprise. It was around then that the sheer hopelessness of the situation came to me. 6 acres is a lot of ground to be searching for just 2 people. This was insane. I knew Wendy was worried, but it was impossible for us to even begin to consider finding them at all. I hung my face in my hands, feeling the cool ice that was forming on them. I didn't want to give up yet. Liam was my friend and the couple had seemed like nice people. If there had been an accident, I wanted to help. But at the same time, on the last act of desperation, I charged forward a few feet in the snow, cupped my hands over my mouth, and yelled, "Liam!" as loud as I could. My voice echoed down the aisles of trees, dying away in the blowing snow and wind. That was the final straw. I turned around to start my hike back to the house, when a light suddenly winked on about 15 feet down the road to my right. I breathed a sigh of relief and began walking towards the brightness as it swung lazily, catching snowflakes as it went. "Jesus, Liam, where did you guys go? I thought..." I called out, picking up my pace as I got closer. Right when I was about 10 feet away, the light blinked off, leaving me in darkness again. I cursed under my breath and brought out my flashlight, turning it on and pointing it in the direction that I had seen the beam. "Did your batteries go out? Come on, let's go back to the house." I reached the spot where the light had come from and turned, expecting to see Liam and the couple, perhaps one of them with some sort of explanation as to what was taking them so long. Instead, I saw nothing but an undisturbed pile of snow. I balked, taking a few steps back and shining my light around the 2 trees. There wasn't as much as a footprint to be seen. "Liam?" I called out again, but received no reply, much like I had failed to receive the first time. I realized something then. The lights hadn't looked like it belonged to a flashlight. It was too centralized, casting just a circle of light instead of a beam, almost as if it was a torch of some kind. A movement somewhere in the darkness to my left suddenly caught my attention. I barely had time to turn and look as a dark figure slipped between 2 trees, rustling them slightly and causing the snow on the branches to fall onto the drifts below. "Liam?" I called, although quieter this time. I walked a few steps forward to the gaps in the trees, keeping my light trained forward. It was about 20 feet or so in front of me. Unlike the previous time, I received a sudden and unexpected response. A deep growl seemed to come from all directions around me, despite the fact whoever was ahead of me was clearly just that. I stopped dead in my tracks as I noticed something. The figure in the tree moved, but not at my level. I saw a head rise up just from below the treetop. No discernible features present in the darkness. It was still rising higher than the trees around it when I turned and fled in the opposite direction. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to get back to the house so Wendy could call the police to find Liam and the couple, and we could all have a good laugh about it. I ran forward as far as I could and cut left in the direction I thought everything was. I looked back for just a moment to see if anything was following me. With a loud crash, I ran directly into the trunk of a tree that I had failed to notice coming up in the darkness ahead. Stars swam in my vision, and I stumbled, tripping over a root and falling into the snow. I laid there for a few moments, dazed. Groaning, I rolled over to the light and came face to face with a bloody visage peering out at me from a large drift. I screamed, scrambling to my feet and throwing snow around as I dug for my flashlight. Finding it, I flicked it back on and pointed the beam. Though she was barely recognizable from the blood that covered her face, I realized it was the body of the young woman half buried beneath one of the trees. Her blue eyes were wide open, terror and fear in them. I dug up a small portion of the powder that covered her and nearly cried out. Her throat had been ripped out, the blood already starting to freeze under the chill. Her left arm was half gone, ripped and missing below the elbow. I didn't want to see the rest of her. I put my hand over my mouth to keep myself from vomiting. Oh my God, this was really happening. I needed to get back to the house and call the police. Who could have done this? I tried to catch the lights from the house shining over the treetops, but I didn't see anything. The snow was driving too hard for me to figure out what direction I was going. I'd just have to trust my instinct. I hastily recovered the body in the snow and tried to memorize where it was. As I headed off, I made a mental note to say a prayer for the woman whose name I didn't even know. Even though I had walked only about a half a mile into the property, it felt like 5 or 6. The snow seemed to get higher and more impassable with every step I took. As though I was getting closer to the house, I began to notice that some of the clouds were sweeping across the sky, disappearing over the woods behind the fence that marked where the Jackson's tree ended, and the forest began. The stars began to come out one by one, appearing from behind the clouds like diamonds. And then, all at once, the moon came out from behind a large gray blanket, as full and bright as I had ever seen it. The silvery lights it casted illuminated the snow below me, causing it to almost sparkle in the air night. I suddenly became aware of a low, visceral sound coming from somewhere ahead of me. Panicking, I frantically dug in my pockets for anything that could be considered a weapon. The best I could come up with was a flashlight I already held in my hand, so I held it above my head and began to move forward again. The sound became more defined as I approached it. It was a low, gurgling moan. Just as I stepped between 2 trees and into an open row, I saw the source of it. Dolan was stumbling along the path, grasping his hands to his stomach. Blood welled between his lips and dripped down his face. Judging by the trail he was leaving, he had come from the right. "Dolan!" I yelled, racing forward and putting my hands on his shoulders. "Oh my God, man. What the hell happened to you?" He looked up at me and attempted to speak, but only managed to cough out a thick, red sludge that dripped onto the snow at our feet. "We need to get you out of here," I cried, putting my arm around him and dragging him quickly in the direction I had been heading. He groaned and pawed a hand at the air, as if wanting me to see something. I turned just as we were about to head back into the trees. I recognized the icy stream that ran along the northeastern section of the farm. The shards of ice shone moonlight, carrying a bare thickle of water as it flowed towards the pond near the easternmost point. There, Near the bank, I saw something. A massive creature was hunched near the slope that led down into the bank, occasionally dipping its head down. I saw bits and droplets of something fly from its muzzle every time it lifted it up to the night sky to snap something down. Yellow eyes burned deeply in the sockets, and I saw a clawed hand swipe down every now and again and tear off another chunk of whatever it was feeding on. With a loud rip, a portion of the thing's meal came off. It eagerly bit and snapped into it before suddenly throwing it over its shoulder, sailing through the air before coming to a messy landing about 10 feet away from us. I recognized the bloody pulp of the young man's head immediately. Dolan groaned again and stumbled against a nearby tree before coming to a rest at its base. "Man, you can't sit down. We have to," I began to say, but was cut short when he lifted his hand again, pointing at something just past the stream. Looking up, I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. A procession of 8 or 9 people were walking along the fence just beyond, one after the other. All of them seemed to be dressed in dark robes and holding torches, illuminating the way as they walked. They passed right by the feasting creature as if it wasn't there at all, before disappearing behind a line of trees. I didn't even have time to process what was happening before the chewing and slurping noises ceased. The thing suddenly turned its head to the left, and I got my first good look at it. A massive wolf's head sat atop a hairy, vaguely man-shaped form. Long claws at least a foot in length, speared from all 2 human fingers. Its fangs glinted in the wintry moonlight, slobber and blood dripping from its gaping maw. I didn't think it would ever stop, as it rose its full height. From where I was, it had to be at least 9 feet tall. It lifted its snout to the sky and let out a long, ear-splitting howl before snapping back down and facing towards us. Dolan gave a strangled cry, and I almost did the same. The thing howled before it got to its hands, and started loping towards us at a speed that didn't seem scientifically possible. I jumped up, heaved Dolan to his feet, and began stumbling through the snow in the opposite direction. We heard drifts of snow being plowed as the creature ambled through them, snarls growing louder as it approached. We just reached the next row as the wolf tore through the trees behind us, reducing them to splinters. Dolan screamed, and I was jerked to the side as the claws speared through his leg. With a mighty heave, the wolf threw him far to the left. I instantly heard him crashing down through the rows, as I myself was suddenly swatted to the side. The world rolled around me, trees and branches and the night sky, jetting past my vision before I hit something with a loud crack. My vision swam, and I sank to the snowy ground, warm blood starting to run down my forehead. The last thing I saw before I sunk into the darkness was the wolf crashing through the trees ahead. "Blake!" I groaned, my vision blurring. Someone was shaking my shoulder. I limply swatted at the hand and slumped back down, but they came around my shoulders and shook me harder. "Blake, listen to me. There's something out there." My eyes finally cleared, and I looked up to see Liam shaking me as hard as he could. Sweat rolled down his brow, and he looked terrified. There was a large rip in his coat, and I saw an icy slush of blood and melted snow covering his right arm. "Liam?" I mumbled, getting to my feet. "What's going?" It all suddenly came rushing back to me. "Have you seen it too?" I asked, stumbling back a few steps. Liam nodded gravely. "Yeah, that couple and I had been walking for like 5 minutes when it came and attacked us. I tried to cut it with my saw, but it tossed me aside and went after them. When I woke up again, they were gone. I've been going around trying to find you guys." I reiterated what had happened with me and Dolan. Liam groaned. "We're screwed." We began walking north, being as quiet as possible. The moon overhead was still bright, lighting the way as we went. We tried to slip through the trees that didn't have much snow on them. Whenever it fell off the branches and landed in the drifts, we winced and braced ourselves for that thing to come out at any moment. After what seemed like hours, I caught sight of bright lights peeking through the branches. The trees started thinning out and the ground became more even. It's the house. Liam cried, running forward. We need to call the police. We need to get an ambulance. He was babbling now, not bothering to be quiet anymore. Oh my god, I want to get out of here. I tried shushing him as we stepped through the final row of trees and onto the road that separated them and the house. Dan, Liam called faintly as we walked up the porch. Windy? The first thing we noticed was that the front door was missing. It lay smashed in the front hall, twisted out of shape and spread over a sea of broken glass. Oh no, I moaned. We stepped through the threshold and into the house. Have yourself a merry little Christmas was floating faintly through the archway. We stopped just short of it and peeked inside. A large pool of blood had seeped from the direction of the dining room and stained the hardwood floor. The kitchen looked like a tornado had gone through it. Utensils and broken glass littered the floor and counters. The oven doors had been smashed, and the island had several large cracks in it. I saw a blood-stained hand peeking out from behind it. Beyond that, just out of our line of sight, I saw Dan's baseball hat, matted and soaked with blood. Liam gave a strangled cry and turned, clattering through the front hall and out into the yard. Clutching my hand to my mouth, I did the same, although much quieter. He was leaning against his car, breathing heavily, tears and sweat pouring down his face. I tried to take control of the situation. Let's get out of here. We can take my car. You can call the police on your phone and send them over. They'll take care of. But the rest of my sentence was cut off by a low growl. I looked over Liam's shoulder. Rising up from the opposite side of the car, fangs bared in a snarl, was the wolf. Blood matted its fur and dripped from its muzzle, pattering onto the snow like raindrops. Something glinted in its mouth, and I noticed Wendy's wedding ring was hooked on one of the teeth. Liam, I started to say, but it was too late. With a loud roar, the thing dove over the car and stabbed him with its claws. He gave a strangled cry and went down like a sack of bricks. It jumped on top of him and began to feast immediately. I fled in the opposite direction, heading towards my car. I frantically dug in my pockets for the keys and took them out. I had just put my hand on the handle when a thought crossed over my mind. Dolan. I looked back towards the trees. He couldn't be more than an acre or so inside the farm. I had to try and go get him. I had already seen 5 people die. I couldn't let another one. Making sure the wolf was still occupied, I darted into the trees, running as fast as I could. The branches swatted me as I passed, heading in the direction I thought the 2 of us had been. I tried to rationalize the situation. Dolan can't be too injured, I thought. Once I find him, we'll find a spot to lie low. We'll wait till morning and sneak our way to the cars. Everything will be alright. Even in my head, it sounded impossible. But I had to try. A few minutes later, I'd almost resigned myself to the fact that I'd never be able to find him in time, before I broke out into a large path between the trees and I saw it. I was only about 15 feet away from the large, frozen pond that the stream fed into. Dolan was slumped by the bank. It didn't look like he was moving. I resisted the urge to call out his name and raced forward, skidding to a halt and kneeling in front of him. Dolan, come on, wake up. We've got to get out of here. He stirred softly and began to sit up. Blake, what was that thing? The tree line behind us exploded in a shower of wood fragments and branches. I barely had time to turn around when the wolf's claws dug into me again, tossing and sending me flying forward. I sailed through the air and landed with a hard bang on the frozen surface of the pond. Stars danced in front of my eyes, and I turned to see the wolf rising over Dolan, claws raised in the air, ready to deliver a killing slash. He moaned feebly and was trying to crawl away. I looked around at the shreds of ice and snow that lay beside me. An idea suddenly clicked in my head. I snatched up one of the shards of ice. Winding my hand back as far as it could go, I flung it in the wolf's direction. It struck it squarely in the snout and it faltered, claws lowering for a moment. I lobbed more snow and ice at the thing, yelling "hey" as loud as I could. The wolf turned in my direction and snarled. I dropped the shard of ice I had been holding and stood there, waiting. With a loud roar, the thing sprang up and dove through the air towards me, arcing above my head with its claws raised up for a killing blow. At the last moment, I dove to the right and skidded across the ice, heading for the other side of the pond. The wolf landed and cracked the frozen water with a loud sound that echoed through the trees like shattering glass. It broke through and fell into the freezing water with a tremendous splash. I made it to the other side and collapsed in the snow. I heard the thing howl again and saw its large claws batting at the sides of slick ice, but it was too slippery. Its struggles grew weaker, and a few minutes later, it disappeared below the surface without a sound. I got to my feet again and began making my way towards Dolan, but before I could reach him, a sudden movement caught my attention. As I watched, the cloaked figures we had seen earlier began emerging from the trees, now missing their torches. Each had something silver around their necks that hung down and glinted in the moonlight. The hoods were pulled down too far in front of their faces to make out any details. They came to a rest at the opposite side of the pond and stood there, watching us. Then, just as quickly as they had come, they began rapidly walking towards Dolan. "What are you doing?" I cried, not quite sure what was going on. I watched as they reached him, took him up in their arms, and began walking back towards the tree line. I ran forward, shouting. Catching them just as they started disappearing, I heard Dolan cry out weakly and saw him fidget in their arms. I reached out and grabbed one of the cloaked figures by the shoulder. With sudden speed, a knife flashed in their hand and plunged into my arm. I screamed and backed up, tripping and falling against the ground. There was sudden, sharp burst of pain as my head collided with a rock. Moments before, I blacked out. I saw the last of the figures slip out of sight. I awoke in the back of an ambulance a few hours later. Apparently someone had heard a commotion on the farm and called the cops. They had found me on the edge of the pond, alone. In the hospital, the police tried to question me about the events of the night. I knew telling them what had really happened would result in institutionalization, so I made up a story about being knocked out when I went to help the customers find their trees. "That makes you the only survivor, boy," one of them said. "You're pretty lucky. 6 fatalities and you were fortunate enough to live." I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean 6? They told me they had found the body of a man beneath the ice in the pond. It appeared he had fallen through and frozen to death. They showed me his picture. I had no idea who he was. When I asked about Dolan, they said they hadn't recovered his body anywhere on the farm. They also searched the forest behind the farm. They found some sort of strange ritual site in a clearing, with a stone table and frayed ropes at the 4 corners. There were deep scratches in the rock, as if something had been tied to it and desperately wanted to be let free. It also appeared that it had been vacated very recently, perhaps even just following the massacre. All attempts to figure out what any of it meant went nowhere. I missed the holidays with my family. I was still in the hospital. They brought me Christmas dinner and presents, but I really wasn't in the festive mood. Luckily, I was able to get out just in time to head back to college. The incident became sort of a legend in my town. The Jacksons had been upstanding members of the community, and everyone mourned their deaths. The unknown couple, it turned out that they were from a town or so over, and Liam received their own candlelight vigils as well. I returned home the next Christmas to my town thrown into chaos. Numerous pets and animals had been found slaughtered in the night, scattered across the fields and lawns. A local boy had gone missing a few weeks prior. He had yet to be found. One night, I got up to get a drink of water. As I passed the kitchen window, movement near the tree line caught my attention. I looked up. A hooded figure just stood inside the canopy, snow and ice crusting its billowing robes. I finally recognized the thing around its neck. It was an intricate silver carving of a wolf. And there, in the trees just beyond, I could barely make out a pair of glowing yellow eyes. Though they were wild and had a deep rage in them, I recognized who they belonged to immediately. The glass fell from my hands and shattered against the kitchen floor. I watched through the falling snow as the two sunk back into the shadows, swallowed up by the darkness of the trees.